Thanks. I'm Erin Lentz, and I've got a question for Ibukon. I thought your presentation was really interesting, and thinking about, say, demographic and health survey data that have a series of quantitative questions around decision making, and the responses are joint, with, alone, or with my husband, or my husband makes the decision. What do you think your findings say about the usefulness of decision-making questions such as those? Thanks.
And then we had...
Thank you for your presentations. My name is Matilda from the University of Ghana. My question is actually for the last presenter. There's been a lot of concern, as you rightly said, that aflatoxin causes stunting in children. And when we look at complementary foods in many developing countries, for Ghana, for example, there is an increased promotion of using cereal legume mixes. Okay? And one of the greatest concerns is we don't know where these come from, and they're usually used as complementary food for children under 2. And so I'm thinking, very interesting presentation, that do you see this tool being able to be used to test the level of aflatoxin in such mixes? Thank you.
Excellent. I think we had a questioner on my left, your right. Was there? Yes, the microphone could go in the back there.
I actually have one mic. Can I get it?
Okay, so you go ahead, and then a microphone over here, please.
Thank you, presenters. My question is to Mr. Amit. So regarding the aflatoxin testing unit, do you have a cost of this, and is this applicable to farmers? I'm working with aflatoxins, and I'm thinking of a certification system where farmers can test their grains and use that as a proxy for food quality and sell it for a higher price. So I'm thinking that do you have a specific cost, and is it farmer friendly? And I'm also assuming that this can be used for other crops such as maize and rice as well. Correct me if I'm wrong. So yeah, these are my questions. Thanks.
My question is to Francis Knight. This is a very wonderful tool that you are explaining, because this will not only be beneficial for the researchers, but this will be definitely beneficial for the practitioners like us who are choosing the crops for nutritional garden. So my question is that what is the time required for implementing all the set of tools that you described, and what are the biggest challenges for implementing that tool? Thank you.
Excellent. 4 great questions. Then we'll have another round. So, Buki, you want to go first?
Hi, Erin. Thanks for your question. So that's also part of what we're doing is we are using the DHS decision-making questions, and we're going to compare them to the results that we found. But we found it doesn't really compare to what we're getting from the interview questions. And even when we pre-tested and we just asked, without the POW sort, but we asked people, how do you make decisions about this or that? Usually people are just saying joint. So even in an interview, it's hard. I think the issue is just that decision-making is really complicated. And oftentimes people, they think we're making it joint, But then when you ask deeper questions about but the last time, how did you actually make a decision? How did you get from point A to point B? Then you get different answers. So.
Thank you very much for the question. They're really important points. In terms of time, and I have to say as a caveat here, we have not yet tested this widely. We think that you could be able to develop the data inputs and then go through the workshops in a week. That's our goal, at least, because we know if it's in a real life programming situation, people are not really going to want to use it if it's much more time. That then means that one of the biggest challenges will be agreement on the data inputs. So if you have instead used more qualitative inputs, sort of an estimate of how much the sort of water needs for a tomato differ from amaranth, for example, it's about then making sure that people who are involved in the decision making are confident or accepting of those data inputs. And then the other challenge would be, of course, in the participatory process, and I think that Greg and Ibukun both made really nice points to this. You can have a participatory process and people involved in the meeting, but when you come to the big workshop, there might be different power dynamics. So we're also looking at some evaluation methods to look at how that influences things, but then look at maybe how we'll adapt the process to be able to really control for that as much as we can.
Thanks for your Thanks for your questions. The first one was regarding different food metrics. So we started as a model system, the peanuts, but we are definitely going to move on to other metrics. And we already moved on to not beyond peanuts in blood and urine, because we also want to evaluate what's the exposure look like. It's like evaluating one in a food, and the other is how you exposed, and can you measure those aflatoxin exposure in human. The other question was regarding the cost and applicability for farmers. So the device is very it's built with a very open source hardwares, and which are very cheap. We are doing it in lab scale, so that maybe the thing building a 2 or 3 device is costly, but when it goes for mass production, it should be cheap. The present cost is around maybe $100 for a device, but the $100 is for the touchscreen one. The other one is way cheaper because the touchscreen costs a lot. And again, I think for other food metrics you also asked, yeah, we will definitely look for other food metrics, but we initially started because it's predominant in maize and peanuts. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. And I think we'll have time for just 2 more questions in this round. The gentleman in the red shirt, and then,
Yeah, this is regarding question to aflatoxin again. Have you validated in the laboratory this trial nanoparticles, this test? Because this is the biggest problem with the livestock feeds in India. So mainly the B1 and M1. So this kind of using nanoparticles and trying really having validation at laboratory, that really helps all the industry. That's why I'm asking, is it really validated? Then can you try all this M1 and B1 also this way?
Regarding validation.
Hi, I'm Mia Blackstead. Thank you all for really impressive presentations on a range of topic and methods. My question is for Ibukun. Can you touch a little bit upon the aspect where people were hiding money from their spouses? I'm wondering what the magnitude you think of this phenomenon is, and a lot of the qualitative and quantitative research we do is relying on people being honest in conveying their food expenditure and consumption. So I'm wondering, particularly for quantitative surveys trying to get at market food expenditure and different household fiscal budgeting, do you think that will kind of bias the results that we're getting if this is a common phenomenon? Thanks.
Regarding validation, so we did in-lab validations, but we yet not done the third-party validation. But we would like to do the third-party validations in future. Maybe like the next steps will be those like validating. We are working with our collaborators to validate these assays in a field setup, because we are building these assays to be applied in various points of in various points in the supply chain, where we can validate that is it useful, because what we are doing in lab, it's controlled environment. I don't know how it will work in hot and humid Indian condition or in African conditions.
Okay, and then for your question, I can speak more generally. I think that we found that there are differences between when you ask the woman and the man, even within the same household. So whether it's about income or even food security or whatever it is. So I'm not sure about a way to go about addressing that problem. But I think, if you're doing like some sort of, if you're looking at markets and income, and you're going to get different answers if you ask the husband and the wife within the household. So I think that's a problem that we're starting to see now as we all do our research.
Thank you. Really interesting presentations. One for Lucas. I was really curious about the underutilized foods, and I was wondering potentially why they're underutilized. It could be that they're grown for sale, or it could be that they might not be very acceptable to people. I loved that you could do this analysis with existing data. That's what I understood, which I think is really just quite promising to a lot of us who have data sets. But if you were planning a new survey, would there be any sort of very easy data collection methods that you considered that could collect a little bit more information on the reasons why they're underutilised and also the foods that were not consumed that you mentioned?
Hello, my question is to Marianne. The HWISE tool you presented, I want to know, it's very similar to the household food insecurity assessment scale. They are very similar, right? Now, the household food insecurity assessment scale doesn't have any universal cutoff. So I want to know whether HWISE has a cutoff for determining who is water secure or not. And then the intervals between the scales, are they equal? How do you really, I just want to know how you really need to interpret this if you maybe conducted a study in a local setting. Thank you.
Thanks. This was a great panel. I've got a question for Jan. So the World Food Program has done some of this data collection as well, and they were trying to do it over time, and they had a huge attrition problem. And I guess I was wondering if you could talk about the usefulness of these tools as kind of snapshots versus trying to go back to households again and again in a longitudinal thing.
Okay, Francis, so thank you for your question. Yeah, so as you mentioned, yeah, the main advantage maybe is that it's already using existing data sets. We just need to aggregate the data at species level. So we need to realize that one species can be source of more food groups. Yeah. So once we aggregate the data per species, you can identify the species and its contribution to dietary diversity or its level of underutilization. And those species, potentially, they might be really useful for nutrition-sensitive agriculture projects or programs. Yeah, but many of them, they might be really underutilized, but there's a whole range of reasons, you know, because of accessibility, getting lost the local knowledge, also intensification of agriculture. So the plants might be there, but they are maybe consumed by a few people, yeah, only tiny proportion of respondents. But for example, this index of underutilization of species, it's actually bringing up these underutilized species, which we usually have at the bottom of our table. It's bringing them up by high value. So it's assigned high value to those underutilized species. But inflation may be a little bit that more food groups the species provide, the more can be underutilized, actually. Yeah. So there is a slight maybe inflation, but because, yeah, it would reach the highest level of utilization if every respondent consume every edible plant part of that species. This is not really, this is unlikely to happen, but anyway, we don't consume food plants in an hour, only 24 hours, but we consume species every day. So once the species which has more food groups is in a home garden, it can be consumed one day or another day. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you for the question. I can help you with one of them, which is the cutoff. So yes, we do have the cutoff. It's 12. So there's 12 questions, and you can score 0 to 3 for each of them. So 12 out of 36 means you're water secure. For the invariance, I actually just had this conversation with Sarah because I'm not 100% convinced either. But what I can do, if I can get your email, you, me, and the statistician, we can have this conversation about this invariance because I'm also still skeptical. So maybe I shouldn't have said that, but I did. So.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for your question about the attrition levels. So in this study, we only did it as a snapshot. I've used IVR in some other contexts. So. For example, in Tanzania, we used it over a full cropping season to support farmer field schools, but we were also looking at kind of collecting information from the farmers themselves about kind of challenges that they were having, as well as kind of activities they were doing, so we could kind of understand the timings there. Similarly, I did some research in Nigeria where we're looking at the availability of cassava. So we're looking at, you know, when do farmers have cassava available for sale? And that was also over a period of, about six to 7 months. So the way that we tried to manage the attrition levels was by not just asking questions, but by trying to provide some information as well. So in the Tanzania example, we would provide them with a weather forecast, we'd give them reminders about what they learned in the farmer field schools. And when it came towards kind of harvest and marketing season, we'd also try and provide them with some market prices. So, you know, we kept it relevant to them. We kind of provided information, asked some questions, and provided some information. And similarly in Nigeria, we were giving people prompts, advice on good agricultural practices. We were giving them kind of just simple telephone numbers of input providers. And we were also trying to link them to kind of buyers. So in these cases, we found, I think in Tanzania, the response rate was quite flat at about 65% over the full time. Nigeria was a bit lower because it was, I think a longer period of time, but that was also at about 30–40%. So you kind of find that people that are engaging with the service kind of remain loyal over the period that you're conducting the study.